Gospel of John, chapter 10, 22 through 30. At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of the Father's hand. The Father and I are one." It's a great story. It's a little snippet. You know, we're in the winter where we have jumped from Easter to pre-Easter, and we're getting caught up on some of the stories. When I was corresponding with Tom earlier in the week, I said, "I don't know how I'm going to weave this scripture story into Mother's Day, but by golly, I'm going to do it somehow. I just don't know how yet." And as I thought about it, and as I prayed about it, and as I remembered my mother, because it's coming to Mother's Day, I kept hearing, "My sheep hear my voice. My sheep hear my voice." I had back surgery many years ago. Well, let's see, William is, our nephew is almost 30, so it's almost 30 years ago. I had back surgery, and I used to have very, very low blood pressure. Coffee was my friend in the morning. I'd really have to get up and run to do some, and really exercise early in the morning because it was so low. I had to get my body moving. Otherwise, I would just sleep all day. And so when I had that surgery, it took me a long time to come out of recovery because they gave the anesthetic for people my size, my weight, my height, and so on. But my blood pressure was so low that it took hours for me to wake up. And then I finally got taken up to the room, and my mother was there. My mother was always there when we needed. She was a nurse, after all, and she could keep an eye on things, and we always felt so safe when Mom was around. There were 6 of us. She spent, many times in the hospital with each one of us. And so I had to get up out of the bed and walk. And she watched me with the nurse. So we were up, I had the IV pole, we were up, we were heading, and she said, the color in my face left, my whole body, the color left. And then she saw my eyes go. And between the nurse and her, they caught me so I didn't get hurt landing on the floor. I was gone. I was gone. I don't know how long I was gone, but I heard my mother's voice. "Eileen! Eileen! Eileen! Eileen!" Louder, more urgent. And I remember being in a pit and sitting in this pit saying, "Gosh, I wonder how long I'm going to be here." And then I heard Mom's voice. And I heard it get more urgent. And I thought, well, I better do something about this because Mom's freaking out and I'm not paying attention. And I finally woke up. My mother's love called me back from being gone. As a nurse, she knew that if she didn't get me back quick, I'd be gone for a very long time. And she didn't want that to happen. I knew my mother's voice, and I followed it. Jesus' followers knew his voice. They knew his his message, and they followed it. The Jews at this time were asking, when are you going to make your move? If you are the Messiah, and that reminded us of the beginning of Jesus' ministry. If you are the Messiah, we've heard that question posed to him before. That was when he had just come out of the 40 days in the desert of fasting and prayer, and the tempter was there. If you are the Messiah, and you're so hungry, turn these stones into loaves of bread and feed yourself. If you are the Messiah, do these things. And here we have the Jews who were not part of his flock saying, if you are the Messiah, then make your move. They were expecting an army to overthrow the occupiers, the Romans, who were imposing themselves and weren't all that kind. But then we have to remember that they were also building the roads, and they were imposing order, because there were a lot of warring factions among the Jews, different groups that were not only upset with the Romans, but they were upset with each other. There were the clashes going on all the time in this point in history in that part of the world. If you are the Messiah, make yourself known to us. But he had been, and that's what he said. My sheep know me, and you can't take them out of my hand. The Father's work through me has already been made known. It is already clear. And then we'll see this played out to its X degree with his rising on Easter. But at this point, it was before he got into a lot of trouble with the traditional Jews. If you are the Messiah, of course he was. But they didn't see it. They were blinded by their intention and what they thought was necessary. What I have to say, when I was 17, I was blinded by my mother's intentions, because at 17 I knew everything, right? I was in high school, and I knew everything that there was to know, and just ask me. And it didn't matter that she was 30 years older than me, because, what did she know? She had prehistoric information, and my information was current. So I was blinded until I really needed her help. And it was as if a veil was lifted. And I could see the love that my mother had for not only me, but all 6 of us. Mom always said that she didn't have any favorite children. She loved all 6 of us equally. But some of us were easier to get along with than others. So that made me remember this little tiny book. I don't know if you guys have read this, but it's called The 4 Agreements, a Toltec wisdom book. And it's a practical guide for freedom, for personal freedom. And there are 4 lessons, master lessons of Toltec wisdom, and it's the summary of those lessons, this book. So I was thinking about the 4 agreements, and the idea of this book is that in this physical world we're living a dream. We're not seeing what is actually going on. The Jews at the time were not seeing what was happening with Jesus, and Jesus was teaching his followers the truth about life. That love is the most important thing that you can do. You must forgive your neighbor. Don't judge others, because you don't have all the information. And as you create these judgments and these resentments and this anger in your mind and in your emotions, you're blocking off seeing the bigger picture and the bigger intention that God has for you. That's what Jesus' followers were getting. And the Jews that were approaching Jesus, if you are the Messiah, didn't understand it. They couldn't understand it, because they were so filled with a need to get rid of this occupying country, and never mind that they were putting in plumbing systems and roads and things, never mind the benefits that they were getting. They needed to get them out. They didn't like them. They were imposing taxes on them that they didn't want to pay. They only wanted to pay their tithe because they were Jewish, and being Jewish meant that that was a nationality as well as a religion, and they wanted to go back to their own rules, their own comfort zone, their own way of being. And Jesus said, well, you can't get to it that way. You can't get it through fighting. You can't get there through anger. You have to do something differently. And this little group of people that he was teaching, because in comparison it was a very small group, this small band of alternative lifestyle seekers, they were choosing love instead of anger. They were choosing compassion instead of vengeance. It was an alternative lifestyle. And that's also what my mother tried to teach us. There were 6 of us. I'm number 4 of 6. And I have, in our birth order, I have an older brother immediately older than me and a younger brother immediately younger than me. And Mom told me one day I actually would love my brothers. I couldn't see it. I was living a dream that my life was going to be perpetual torment and teasing. I couldn't see it. I was mad about it. And she kept saying, you gotta forgive them. The only reason why they're teasing you is because they love you. And I said, tell them not to love me so much. I can't stand it. My Barbie dolls would hang by their necks from my doorknob. Come on. Don't love me so much, right? So we come to the 4 agreements, because these agreements may as well have come out of my mother's heart. So the first agreement is be impeccable with your word. Now, what I learned from this book is that the word impeccable comes from a Latin derivation, which means without sin. And then if we go to the Greek, sin means missing the mark, missing the target. It was an archery term. So without missing the mark. But what mark are we hitting? And it's a very interesting and lovely book, because it weaves in some of the language of the Toltecs. For example, our word is our thought expressed. And if we look at the very beginning of John, the Gospel of John, very first chapter, the first words, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And Don Miguel Ruiz, Don is an honorific, it's not his first name, it is as if saying Father or Reverend Miguel Ruiz. So Don Miguel Ruiz says that our word is the creative force in the universe. The Word of God is the creation of the universe. So as we speak, we create. And he says we can use our word as black magic or as white magic. So if someone told you that you couldn't sing, that you were ugly, that you'll never be able to read, they were using black magic at you. And if you made the agreement with them, yes, I can't sing, I'm ugly, I'll never be able to do anything. If you make that agreement, you're living a dream, because that's not the truth of you. The truth of you is that you are made in God's image and likeness, that you are the life and love of God. That is the truth. But someone has to spell on you. And then he says, how are you using your word? Are you using it to bring that life out of the other person? Or are you casting a black magic spell on them? I thought that was a very interesting way for us to look at the words that are coming out of our mouth. How are we using this gift that God gave us, this air that comes out of our lungs and passes through our vocal cords and our mouth, and we shape sounds with it. And we've all agreed that these certain shapes that we make with our mouth create sounds that we all recognize. In this country, in another country, the sounds are different. And those people have made an agreement about what those sounds mean. Are we making these sounds a gift of God to each other? Or are we cursing them with our intention? Isn't that an interesting idea? So that's the first agreement that we made. We have all kinds of agreements. We've made thousands of agreements. From the time we were born, we agreed to listen to our parents because they were feeding us and taking care of us, so we agreed to their rules. Now I have to say, as I became a teenager and I started making other agreements with my friends and, and looking worldly wise and everything, I made other agreements. And I chose to decline some of the agreements that I made with my parents. And then into my 20s, I thought, oh, they're not so dumb after all. They might have something. So some of the agreements came back. But some of them I was able to choose on my own. So the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word. How are we using our word to create our experience? Are we waking up in the morning saying, oh my gosh, look at the snow on the mountains, and the sun is shining. It is a gorgeous day. Or are we saying, gotta shovel the snow? I don't want to get out of bed. I stayed up too late last night. How are we using our word? Are we creating a heavenly experience right here? Or are we making it hell on earth? We have to choose. And my mother would say, don't be a crybaby. Look for the positive. Be impeccable with your word. The next agreement is, don't take things personally. Oh, Mom had a field day with that one. Don't take things personally. No matter what the brothers were doing or saying, it's their stuff, not mine. No matter what Sister Euphemia said, did, hit with, that was her issue, not mine. It was her playing out her insecurities and working through her filters and how she was raised. It had nothing to do with me. I reminded her of someone. Don't take things personally. He says, nothing others do, what others do has nothing to do with you. It has to do with their dream, their perceptions, their experiences. We are ultimately responsible for ourselves and for finding our way out of the dream, finding our way out of the pit of an experience that we might be having, and to realize that we are the light, the life, and the love of God right here and right now. And we don't use our word to disparage any of that, because that's the truth of us. So don't take things personally. They're in their dream. We need to wake up from ours. That's our job. And we bless them. I always try to bless people, but not in the Texas bless. Oh, bless your heart. Not that bless. Truly, sincerely bless them and let them go on their way. The next agreement is don't make assumptions. I love this one. Don't make assumptions. How many times do we make assumptions? We make a lot of assumptions every single day. I mean, autopilot, we live on assumptions, right? Or somebody will do something and say something, and we absolutely know that they were doing that because they were just trying to me off. Just tick me off on that one. I had to come up with the word. Tick me off. Because they knew how to push my buttons, and they did it. Because they were out to get me. Well, first of all, I was taking something personally. But secondly, was that true? Is what I'm thinking about the other person true? Well, yeah, because they're a jerk. But how do I know it's true? Well, because they've done this before. But am I absolutely sure that it's true? Yes or no? Well, no. I'm not absolutely sure. If I keep dialing back, it's an assumption that I've made about them. So he says, ask questions. You have a right to ask questions. Ask the question. When you say this, I think you mean that. Is that true? I can't tell you how many times I've had, no, that's not true at all. It's blah, 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 something entirely different that was much more positive. I had a coworker who, some days she was just in a bad mood and assuming that everybody was out to get her. We have those days. And she got some kind of email from somebody and she was furious. So she brought the email over to me and said, look what so-and-so sent me. How dare they type to me in that way? And I looked at it and I read it and I went, okay, what do you think they said? Because it was a vanilla, generic request for information. There was absolutely no emotion, there were no capital letters, there were no exclamation marks, there was nothing. It was a professionally written note. I said, what do you think is going on here? And she said, well, because she was reading an assumption where there wasn't one. Because she and this other person had words years ago. I read it out loud to her and I said, what am I missing? Because I do miss words. You know, that if I'm just reading normal size font, there's a good chance I'll miss a word. I said, what am I missing here? She went, oh, well, when you read it like that, when you read it like that, yes. When you ask questions, when you ask. Jim and I had to do that because Jim spoke Ramsey and I spoke Fairy. When you say X, Y, Z, I hear ABC. Is that what you meant? Yes or no? And sometimes it's yes. Okay, so we're on the same page. We're speaking the same language. But sometimes I had it wrong because I was hearing through my filters and he wasn't. So don't make assumptions, ask questions, get clarifications. You always have the right to ask a question. Everybody has a right to ask a question. Now the person answering may say, you know, I really don't want to get into it. And that's their right. And that is your right if someone asks you a clarifying question as well. But we want to make communication with each other as clear as possible. We want to be as clear and supportive and as loving as possible with each other. We want to come from that mother's heart that Tom sang about and that this day's message is about. A mother's heart, the heart of the mother, which is a song that I may tell you about later, I'm not sure. And then the last agreement in the book is always do your best. Always do your best. Mom used to say that too, just do your best. You don't have to be perfect. Although my oldest sister thought she had to be perfect. Mom didn't expect her to be perfect, but you know, the rules kind of changed from the firstborn to the sixthborn. You know, there were much stricter rules that began with this, and the older kids remembered the rules. So when number 6 came along and those rules were relaxed, the older kids enforced the rules on the younger kids, and Mom and Dad didn't have to. It was just an automatic process. But to hear the conversation about my mom, for example, from my oldest sister, was that Mom was so critical of me. Mom was so this, Mom was so that. And I said, did you ever ask her about it? Well, no. Well, the two of them couldn't really, they really didn't have good communication skills with each other. However, when Mom would talk about Pam to her cousins, her friends, whoever it was, Pam walked on water. Pam was not only a nurse, but she was also an attorney. because, nursing wasn't stimulating enough for her. Pam had a fabulous career, a fabulous life. And Pam was always the definitive answer on everything according to my mother. Whatever Pam said was gospel for her, because Pam was so magnificent in her eyes. But she couldn't tell that directly to Pam because they couldn't ask each other questions. They assumed about each other. But Mom always knew that Pam would do her best, as we all did our best, and our best was different. So Pam's best was different than my best. My best is different than my brother's best. And that's how our lives are. Always do your best, not somebody else's best. Not somebody else's expectation of your best. Just do your best. And sometimes our best changes throughout the day. If we wake up and we're in a good mood, we've had a good night's sleep, we had a happy day yesterday, our best is terrific. And by the end of the evening, when we're tired and we've been doing whatever we've been doing all day, our best may not be so much. And we need to forgive ourselves for having an expectation that it needs to be something else, because we do our best. And if we do our best in every situation, no matter what that best is, if we're sick, it's not as good, our best isn't as good as when we're healthy, or at least our expectation of it is different. As long as we do our best in whatever situation we are, then we can be satisfied that we are doing our best. He also talks about in our brains, we have this judge and jury, because we've made agreements on what our best should be all the time. And we may not be living up to the expectations and the rule book that we all have in our brains. We all live by certain rules, and we are our own worst critic. But if you do your best, you silence the judge. You silence the jury. I've done my best for today. And I have no regrets. I've done my best. And that judge has to zip it, because that's where we are. And as long as I did my best, my mother was ecstatic. She could see potential in us. I'm going on about my mother because it is Mother's Day. I am biased. I was born into a very loving family. These two people wanted every single kid that came, even though there were 6 of us. She was just so, we thought that for a little period of time that we were all in trouble, because there was a time period that she was very cranky with us, very cranky. And it turns out that's also when we were teenagers. So I don't know if there's any relationship with that, our behavior and our know-it-all expertise at that time, and she was just exasperated with 6 of us. But because it's Mother's Day, because I knew her voice, and because she knew all of our voices, because she could see through our clouded vision of ourselves, she could reach in and pull out the highest and best we could possibly be. She was able to see through our confusion and give us her best love, no matter what we were doing. And she could just reach in and pull out, by asking questions, she could pull out answers from us that we didn't know we had within. The heart of a mother. The heart of a mother. Now, I know from experience with friends that not all moms are like that. Every mom is doing absolutely the best they can. Every mother figure does the best they can. We may not have moms in our experience, but surely at some point we had a mother figure that helped see beyond our own limited thought and pull that out from us. That's what Jesus was doing with his followers. He saw their potential when they couldn't see it in themselves, and he helped pull that out from them. They knew his voice, and no one could take them from his hand. No one could take us from my mother's hand. And Don Miguel Ruiz, that dream. Our job is to wake up from these limited ideas that were anything less than my mother would have said about every single person in this room. You are whole, you are beautiful, you are perfect, you are made in God's image and likeness, and don't let anybody tell you different. Because that is the truth of you. You are beautiful. You are brilliant. No matter what you're doing, no matter what anybody said. You belong here, and you are a gift to this world. And thank you for being born. And thank you, Mom, for being born and for birthing me. Can you imagine when we take on that mother's heart and see that in everybody else, no matter their behavior, but see that light and love of God that's actually in them? No matter how they've covered it over, no matter what dream they're dreaming, we too can pull that out. We know the voice of God. We know the voice of Jesus. And Jesus knows our voice. And we are here this Mother's Day to remember that each of us, no matter if we're male or female, each of us has that heart of the mother, that unconditional love that sees past the appearance of less than and can bring that out into the world.